Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna work through the multiple choice. Y'all know that a lot of these you will probably see on the test. But also, the way that these are written are good ideas of how the other questions will be written on the test. So let's, oh, that's kind of blurry, right? That's kind of crooked as well. What in the world? How is that for y'all? Okay, under a fractional, okay, fractional reserves. What do y'all get what fractional means? Percentage. Okay. Under a fractional, who's this?
Fine.
Okay.
I sent you an email earlier.
And there's no emails going through the internet now.
Oh.
Okay, so under the fractional, which means percentage, reserve system, so I'm talking about what? From what we learned, what do we know about fractional reserves? What is this? That gives me a percentage, what is this called? This deals with what? What does fractional reserves mean? This is, we're trying to get through vocab here. We've learned this, where I get a percentage of a reserve. This is the reserve requirement. All this means is reserve requirement. Okay, which it could be called a fractional reserve, because it isn't the percentage of fraction. Okay, so under the fractional reserve banking systems, banks are required to keep part of their demand deposit as reserves. Okay, expand the money supply with the request by the central bank. Okay, so some people are shaking no. Ensure the deposits against loss and the bank runs. Pay a fraction of the interest in taxes. Charge the same interest rate on all their loans. Okay, so what's the answer? A is the answer. Y'all just weren't sure of yourself, so I had to read them all. Good. Okay. If a commercial bank has no excess reserves and the required reserve requirement is 10%, what is the value of new loans the single bank can issue to a new customer of the deposit of $10,000? Okay. So I'm trying to figure out what? New loans, right? So what do I have to do? How do I set up my equation? 10,000 times 10%, which gives me what? What is my reserve requirement? 1,000. Is that the answer? Because I want to know new loans, so what else do I have to do? I need to do excess reserve. So my excess reserves equation is what? 10,000 minus 1,000, which gives me what? Is that an answer choice?
So if it's
Yay.
asking for a
New loans,
value or.
new value of what they could loan out, what will be the excess, what are the new loans that they could give, that's excess reserves. Okay? Let's look at this next one. In a country of, I have no clue where this country is. I don't even know if it exists. Argonomia. Anybody know if that exists?
I think it's in West Africa.
West Africa. Okay, well, we're gonna pretend that it's there or it is there. Banks can charge 10% interest on all loans. If the general price level, oh, do y'all want that interest rate? No, that is crazy, right? We all know that that's not good, right?
Right.
Because they could charge me 10%. But if the general price level has been increasing by 4%, so do I add or subtract? Subtract 4%. The real interest rate was what? There we go. Is that even a good interest rate?
No.
6, no. So would we get this loan? No. Okay. How do y'all feel about real interest rate? We're good? Okay. Let's look at 4. A commercial bank is above. What is this? This is a what type of chart?
T.
T-chart. If the reserve requirement is 12% and the bank does not sell any of its securities, what is the maximum amount of additional lending the bank can undertake? Okay, so here's the demand deposits, right? I need to figure out what the reserve requirement is, right? So I take this and I do what?
Define, multiply that by 1.12.
1, 2, which gives me what? I don't have a calculator, but this is basically 100, right? So what is 12% of 100? 12,000, okay? So you were slow on getting your abacuses out. Alright, now I know that this is my reserve requirement. This is their total reserves.
That means excess reserves, right? Is that
No, total, that's what they have in their reserve. So that's all of them, excess and required. Whenever I see total, I always think this is excess and this is required. Have they divvied them up yet? So now let's divvy it up for ourselves. So if there's 15,000 in their excess and required reserves, how much is part of their required reserves? 12,000. Now how much is their excess reserves? 3,000. So the question asks me, how much additional lending can this bank undertake? Can they loan out that full 15? No, because some of that 15 was what? Required. Can they loan out 12? Because that's, they must keep it in the bank. Can they loan out 3? There we go. 5. Assume the reserve requirement is 20%, but the bank voluntarily keeps some excess reserves. $1 million increase in new reserves will result in, okay, wait. They keep some excess reserves, right? They want to see how much the money supply will increase. So what do I need to do here? I want to see how much the money supply will increase. Money multiplier. So my money multiplier is, how do I set this up? 1 over 0.20, that gives me,
5.
okay. So, I could take 5 times a million, right? Because I know that it's gonna be less once I take that required reserves, right? So, will the money supply decrease? So all of these can be eliminated. I know it's gonna be an increase, right? So is that money supply gonna increase more than 1 million? More than 5 million?
No.
Can it? Because if I know 5 times 1, right, that would be the, not the real total, because have I taken out excess? So if I know I had to take excess out of 5 million, right, that required reserve of the excess, would it be more or would it be less? So an increase in the money supply of 5 million or an increase in the money supply less than 5 million? There we go. Did I need to do all the math?
No.
On that one, I kind of cheated because I knew that the excess reserves would had to be taken, that I had to take that required reserves away from the excess, okay? So I did a little cheat because I didn't have to, did I have to know the full number? No, so I just cheated and I was like, okay, is it gonna be more or is it gonna be less? Okay? If on receiving a checking deposit of $300, a bank's excess reserves increased by $255, the required reserve ratio must be what? This is asking me to work it backwards. Let me show you how to work all of this backwards. So how much was my deposit?
300.
How much is my excess reserves? 255. What is 300 minus 255?
45.
How many times does 100 fit into 300? So I'm going to take 45 divided by 3. What is that going to give me?
15.
So what is my reserve requirement?
15%.
Do y'all know how to work it backwards? Okay. So if it was like 400 or whatever, I would divide that by what? 4, and it would have given me 11 point something something. Okay? Do y'all get how to work it backwards? Okay, let's move on. Did I lose anybody? No, y'all are okay? We've been working the math forward, now I just showed you how to do it backwards. Okay, the money creating ability of the banking system will be less than the maximum amount indicated by the money multiplier when? So we know the money multiplier tells me the max that could be loaned out. Well, why wouldn't the max be achieved? That's what the question's asking me. The interest rates are too high. The velocity of money is rising. I haven't talked about velocity of money, I'll do that later. People hold a portion of their money in the form of currency. If you hold your money in your pocket, does that allow for the bank to lend it out? So is that a reason right there? There we go. The unemployment rate is low, does that even relate to this? Okay, the government budget was in a deficit, does that relate to this? No. Alright, let's look at the next one, 8. Assume the reserve requirement is 20%, so I'm gonna circle this because that's really important. If a bank initially has no excess reserves and $10,000, bless you, in cash is deposited in the bank, what is the maximum amount of money which this bank can increase its loans by? So how many equations do I need to do? 2. So how do I set up my first one?
10,000 times 22.
Gives me what? My reserve requirement of what?
2,000.
I'll have calculators that do not have internet capability or smart capability. Okay, they take your capability. So is this the answer?
No.
What do I need to do next?
Subtract the 2,000.
10,000 minus,
2,000.
which gives me what?
8,000.
Is that my answer? Because it asks me increase its loans, right? May increase its loans. That's the answer. So what's my answer here? B. 9. Assume the reserve requirement is 15%, so I'm gonna highlight this. And the bank receives a new check deposit of $200. Which of the following will most likely occur in the bank's balance sheet? So, this 200, does that increase their liabilities or decrease it?
Increases.
Okay, so what could I eliminate?
Anything that says decrease.
D and E. Okay, so now what is the reserve requirement? So what do I need to do? 200 times what?
1.15.
Gives me what?
Said 200.
15 plus 15, because that's 2 times in there.
Yes.
So it gives me what?
30.
30. So we see a liability increased by 200, but is the reserve requirement increased by 170 or by 30? So it's, what's our answer? What would this be? 170 is increase in what? This is excess reserves. So that one's wrong. 10. Which is most likely to occur if the Federal Reserve increases the reserve requirement on demand deposits? Okay, so if my reserve requirement increases, what is gonna happen to my excess reserves? Decrease. So what happens to my money supply? This excess reserves is what I could loan out. So what happens to the money supply? It decreases. So now I'm going to graph this out. I, and then my demand for money. Here's my supply of money. If the reserve requirement goes up, my excess reserves decreases, my money supply decreases. So which way does this curve go? So let's look at this. The question says, which is most likely to occur if the Federal Reserve increases the reserve requirement? I know my excess reserve is going to go down, my money supply is going to go down, my interest rate is going to go up. banks will be able to lend more excess reserves. No, that's wrong, cause the excess reserves goes down. The interest rate will decrease. Did the interest rate decrease? It went what? The money supply will decrease. Okay, there we go. Alright, if the nominal interest rate, so nominal means what? Inflation, right? That's the inflation one. Increases from 6 to 8%, while the real interest rate remained unchanged, then the expected inflation rate remained unchanged? Was there a change?
Yes.
So that's wrong, right? The expected inflation rate decreased by 2%. Is that a decrease? That's a what?
Increase.
So that one's wrong. Expected deflation decreased by 2%. Is that deflation? Disinflation occurs. The expected inflation rate increased by 2. There we go. M1 functions primarily as a unit of account. So what's M1?
Well, the money you
Current-
have on you.
The money you have on you, so it's the
on
mo- it's the currency in your pocket, and what else? Where else is this currency? Money in the bank. So is it a unit of account? Do I go up and be like, oh, my Cheetos cost me 50 cents? Do I use M1 that way? No. Does it store value? Is it a medium of exchange? Cause I have it on me, I could go buy those Cheetos now, right? Sorry, my son likes Cheetos, and so it's the first thing I thought of about what I bought. Okay. 13. Assume the required reserve is 5%, so this is important, I'm gonna highlight it. And the bank keeps an additional 5% in reserves. What are they doing here? They've increased their reserve requirement for themselves to be what? 10%. Are they required to do 10%? But they are making it, right? So if Shane, is that right? I've never seen it spelled that way. Deposited 100 in cash into a checking account. The amount the bank will lend from this deposit is, okay, so we said 10 is 10%, right? So how much is the required reserve to them? $10. So now what is excess reserve?
90.
So is there an answer like that? Oh, yay, C, great. Which of the following is included in M1 and M2? Time deposits. Are time deposits in M1? So that's, it has to be in both, right? Are demand deposits in M1 and M2? If it's in M1, is it in M2?
Yeah.
Yes, there we go. 15. Assume the required reserve ratio is 20%. If coriander, is that correct? I don't know. Coriander deposits 100 in cash to her checking account, what is the maximum amount of new loans the banking system, what is that telling me there? Can create. Do I just want excess reserves on this one? I want total expansion. So what's the first thing I have to do?
The
100 times what? 0.20 gives me what? 20, and this is my required reserves. What do I do next? My excess reserves, 100 minus 20 gives me what? 80. Now, what do I need to do? Money multiplier, which is what? 1 over 0.20, which gives me 5. Now I want to see how this new loan will expand in the banking system. So do I take 20 or 80? 80 times what? Which gives me? Is that an answer? Yay, hooray, we did the math. If the real interest rate is 4%, and an expected inflation is 3%. So is that adding or subtracting? Expected.
Oh,
Adding. The nominal interest rate is what? So 4 plus 3 gives me what? Is that there? There we go.
Wait, so
There.
why do you add it again?
Because they're expecting it. And so they know it's coming. So that's why they add it, cause don't the banks, if they're expecting inflation to go up, aren't they gonna add it into your loan?
yeah.
Yeah, so there you go, that's why. If it would've been unexpected, right?
Okay, so to get nominal, it's real plus expected. Okay.
The money is classified as inconvertible fiat. So y'all know fiat means that it's backed by the government, right? Okay. Can I convert it into anything? I take my dollar up to the bank. I used to be able to take up, and I told y'all this with the populist. Where's my fake money? I used to be able to take this up back in the day when I was a populist. And what would they give me? Gold. I don't have a dollar today. Can I take that dollar up to the bank and be like, give me my gold? They're just gonna look at me, I'm like crazy, right? So that's inconvertible, right? I cannot take my dollar up to the bank and be like, hey, give me something, right? Can I take it up to the store and get something for it? Yes, but I can't take it up to the bank, right? So my money is classified as inconvertible fiat when it is not backed by any valuable commodity. There you go. Good thing it was A. Um, 18. Assume the required reserve ratio is 10%. If Jumangia deposits 50 in cash into her checking account, the maximum change in the demand deposits in the banking system is what? So what do I have to do? Okay, 50 times 0.1 gives me what? 5. 50 minus what? Gives me, what's my money multiplier? 1 over point gives me 10, so now what do I do?
Why 45, that's it.
45 times 10 gives me how much did that money supply increase in the banking system? Is that an answer? D, right? Okay, are y'all getting this? Okay, now what we're gonna do is our review.